Abu Abdallah Muhammad ibn Tumart, a Muslim Berber religious scholar, teacher and political leader, came from southern Morocco. He founded and served as the spiritual leader of the Almohad movement, a puritanical reform movement launched among the Masmuda Berbers of the Atlas Mountains. Ibn Tumart launched an open revolt against the ruling Almoravids during the 1120s. After his death, his followers, the Almohads, went on to conquer much of North Africa and Spain. Biography. Early life. Many of the details of Ibn Tumart's life were recorded by hagiographers, whose accounts probably mix legendary elements from the Almohad doctrine of the founding figure and spiritual leader. Ibn Tumart was born sometime between 1078 and 1082 in the small village of Ijlis in the Sou Valley of southern Morocco. He was a member of the Haga, a Berber tribe of the Anti-Atlas range, part of the Masmuda tribal confederation. His name is given alternatively as Muhammad ibn Abdullah or Muhammad ibn Tumart. Al-Baydak reported that Tumart was actually his father Abdullah's nickname. Ibn Khaldun reports that Muhammad ibn Tumart himself was very pious as a child, and that he was nicknamed Asifu for his habit of lighting candles at mosques. Ibn Tumart came from a humble family and his father was a lamplighter at the mosque. By his own declaration and that of his followers, he claimed to be descendant of Idrisai, a descendant of Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, who took refuge in Morocco in the 8th century. However, and despite being supported by Ibn Khaldun, this ascendancy is today largely disputed. At the time, it was common for Berber leaders and tribes to claim a Sharif lineage in order to gain religious authority. This is due to a hadith which limits the imamate to Quraysh, according to another hadith, specifically to Al-Bayt, although the latter interpretation of the hadith has been challenged as early as the Umayyad era when Muawiyah prevented Al-Hasan ibn Ali, grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, from leading the caliphate. For this reason the early Kharijites leaders in Morocco, despite the military victories, had little success in gaining acceptance outside of the tribes. At the time, Morocco, Al-Andalus and large parts of Maghreb were ruled by the Almoravids, a Maliki puritanical Saharan Sanhaja Berber movements, who founded the city of Marrakesh and accredited with spreading Islam to much of West Africa. To pursue his education, Ibn Tumart went as a young man to Córdoba, which was at the time the biggest center of learning in the Almoravids' dominion, where he was a disciple of at-Turtushi. Thereafter, Ibn Tumart went east to deepen his studies, where he came under the influence Al-Ghazali's ideas. He appears in Baghdad soon after, and he attached himself to the Ash'arite school of theology and the Zahirite school of jurisprudence, but with the creed of Ibn Hazm, which differed significantly from early Zahirites in its rejection of taqlid and reliance on reason doctrines. It was probably while in Baghdad that Ibn Tumart began to develop a system of his own by combining the teachings of his Ash'arite masters with parts of the doctrines of others, with a touch of Sufi mysticism imbibed from the great teacher Al-Ghazali. Hagiographers report that Ibn Tumart was in Al-Ghazali's presence when news arrived that the Almoravids had proscribed and publicly burned his recent great work, Ihya Ulim al-Din, upon which Al-Ghazali is said to have turned to Ibn Tumart and charged him, as a native of those lands, with the mission of setting the Almoravids right. Ibn Tumart's main principle was a rigid Unitarianism which denied the existence of the attributes of God as incompatible with his unity and, therefore, a polytheistic idea. Ibn Tumart represented a revolt against what he perceived perceived as anthropomorphism in the Muslim orthodoxy, but he was a rigid predestinarian and a strict observer of their law. He laid the blame for the theological flaws of the nation upon the ruling dynasty of the Almoravids. Ibn Tumart strongly opposed the sponsorship of the Maliki school of jurisprudence, whom he accused of neglecting the Sunnah and Hadith and relying too much on Ijma and other sources, an anathema to the strict Zahirism favored by Ibn Tumart. Ibn Tumart condemned the subtle reasoning of Maliki scholars as innovations obscurantist, perverse and possibly heretical. Ibn Tumart also blamed the Almoravid governance from the latitude he found in Maghrebi society, notably the public sale of wine and pork in the markets, something the Quran forbids. Another reform was the destruction or hiding of any type of religious art in mosques. His rule and the rule of the Almohads after were full of reforms that attempted to turn the area under his control to the times of Muhammad. Ibn Tumart's followers took up the name Almohads, meaning those who affirm the unity of God. Spanish authors wrote that down as Almohads, by which Almohads entered other languages. Returned to the Maghreb. After his studies in Baghdad, Ibn Tumart is claimed in one account to have proceeded on pilgrimage to Mecca, but was so bubbling with Ash'ari doctrines and a one-minded zeal to correct the mores of the people he came across that he quickly made a nuisance of himself and was expelled from the city. He proceeded to Cairo, and thereon to Alexandria, where he took a ship back to the Maghreb in 1117/18. The journey was not without incident. Ibn Tumart took it upon himself to toss the ship's flasks of wine overboard and set about lecturing the sailors to ensure they adhered to correct prayer times and number of genuflections. In some reports, the sailors got fed up and threw Ibn Tumart overboard, only to find him still bobbing a half-day later and fished him back. After touching at Tripoli, Ibn Tumart landed in Mahdia and proceeded on to Tunis and then Bajia, preaching a Puritan, simplistic Islam along the way. Waving his Puritan staff among crowds of listeners, Ibn Tumart complained of the mixing of sexes in public, the production of wine and music, and the fashion of veiling men unveiling women. Setting himself up on the steps of mosques and schools, Ibn Tumart challenged everyone who came close to debate. Unwary Maliki jurists and scholars frequently got an earful. His antics and fiery preaching prompted fed-up authorities to hustle him along from town to town. After being expelled from Bajia, Ibn Tumart set himself up c. 1119 at an encampment in Malala, where he began receiving his first followers and adherents. Among these were al-Bashir, Abd al-Mumin and Abu Bakr Muhammad al-Baydak. It was at Malala that Ibn Tumart and his close companions began forging a plan of political action. In 1120, Ibn Tumart and his small band of followers headed west into Morocco. He stopped by Fez, the intellectual capital of Morocco, and engaged in polemical debates with the leading Malikite scholars of the city. Having exhausted them, the ulama of Fez decided they had enough and expelled him from the city. He proceeded south, hurried along from town to town like a vagabond. Shortly after his arrival in Marrakesh, Ibn Tumart is said to have successfully sought out the Almoravid ruler Ali ibn Yusuf at a local mosque. In the famous encounter, when ordered to acknowledge the presence of the emir, Ibn Tumart reportedly replied, "Where is the emir? I see only women here." An insulting reference to the Taj el-Mast veil worn by the Almoravid ruling class. Charged with fomenting rebellion, Ibn Tumart defended himself before the emir and his leading advisors, presenting himself as a mere scholar, a voice for reform. Ibn Tumart set about lecturing the emir and his leading advisors about the dangers of innovations and the centrality of the Sunnah. When the emir's own scholars reminded reminded him the Almoravids too embodied puritanical ideals, and were committed to the Sunnah. Ibn Tumart pointed out that the Almoravids' professed Puritanism had been clouded and deviated by obscurantists, drawing attention to the ample evidence of laxity and impiety that prevailed in their dominions. When counted that, at least on points of doctrine, there was little difference between them, Ibn Tumart brought out more emphasis on his own peculiar doctrines on the Tawhid and the attributes. After a lengthy examination, the Almoravid jurists of Marrakesh concluded Ibn Tumart, however learned, was blasphemous and dangerous, insinuating he was probably a Kharijite agitator, and recommended he should be executed or imprisoned. The Almoravid emir, however, decided to merely expel him from the city, after a flogging of 14 lashes. Ibn Tumart proceeded to Aghmat and immediately resumed his old behavior, destroying every jug of wine in sight, haranguing passers-by for impious behavior, address, engaging locals in controversial debate. The ulama of Aghmat complained to the emir, who changed his mind and decided to have Ibn Tumart arrested. After all, he was saved by the timely intervention of Abu Ibrahim Ismail ibn Yasir Ali al-Hazraji, a prominent chieftain of the Hazraji tribe of the Masmuda, who helped him escape the city. Ibn Tumart took the road towards the Su Valley, to hide among his own people, the Hagra cave of Ijlis. Before the end of 1120, Ibn Tumart arrived at his home village of Ijlis in the Su Valley. Almost immediately, Ibn Tumart set himself up in a nearby mountain cave. His bizarre retreat, his ascetic lifestyle, probably combined with rumors of his being a faith healer and small miracle worker, gave the local people the initial impression that he was a holy man with supernatural powers. But he soon set about spreading his principal message of puritanical reform. He preached in vernacular Berber. His oratory skill and crowd-moving eloquence are frequently referred to in the chronicles. Towards the end of Ramadan in late 1121, in a particularly moving sermon, Ibn Tumart reviewed his failure to persuade the Almoravids to reform by argument. After the sermon, having already claimed to be a descendant of Muhammad, Ibn Tumart suddenly revealed himself as the true Mahdi, the expected divinely guided justicer. He was promptly recognized as such by his audience. This was effectively a declaration of war on the Almoravid state, for to reject or resist the Mahdi's interpretations was equivalent to resisting God, and thus punishable with death as apostasy. At some point he was visited by Abu Hafs Omar ibn Yahya al-Hintati, a prominent Hintata chieftain. Omar Hintati was immediately impressed and invited Ibn Tumart to take refuge among the Masmuda tribes of the High Atlas, where he would be better protected from the Almoravid authorities. In 1122, Ibn Tumart abandoned his cave and climbed up the High Atlas. In later years, Ibn Tumart's path from the cave of Ijlis to mountain fort of Tinmal, another conscious echo of the Prophet's life, would become a popular pilgrimage route for the Almohad faithful. The cave itself was preserved as a shrine for many years, where apparently Almohad partisans, regardless of their origin or background, would ceremonially reject the past affiliations and be adopted into Ibn Tumart's Haga tribe. Tinmal and the Almohad rebellion. Ibn Tumart urged his followers to arms in open revolt against the Almoravids, to fulfill the mission of purifying the Almoravid state. In 1122, or shortly thereafter, he founded a rebbe at Tinmal White, in a small valley of the Nfis in the middle of the High Atlas. Tinmol was an impregnable fortified complex, which would serve both as spiritual center and military headquarters of the Almohad rebellion. It is during this period that he wrote a series of monographs on various doctrines for the instruction of his men. These disparate works were later collected and compiled in 1183–84 on the order of the Almohad Caliph Yusuf ibn Abd al-Mamun. 6 principal Masmuda tribes adhered to the Almohad rebellion: Ibn Tumart's own Haga tribe and the Ganfisa, the Gadmilwa, the Hintata, the Haskara and the Hazraya. For the next 8 years, the Almohad revolt was largely confined to an irresolute guerrilla war through the ravines and peaks of the Atlas range. The principal damage done by the Almohads at this stage was the disruption of Almoravid tax collection, and rendering insecure the roads and mountain passes south of Marrakesh. The Su Valley, surrounded on 3 sides by Almohadis Masmuda mountaineers, was nearly cut off and isolated. Of more particular concern to the Almoravids was the threat to the Urika and Tizi and Tichka passes, that connected Marrakesh to the Draa Valley on the other side of the High Atlas. These were the principal routes to the all-important city of Sijil Massa, gateway of the trans-Saharan trade, by which gold came from West Africa to Morocco. But the Almoravids were unable to send enough manpower through the narrow passes to dislodge the Almohad rebels from their easily defended mountain strong points. The Almoravid authorities reconciled themselves to setting up strong points to confine them, while exploring alternative routes through more easterly passes. Ibn Tumart's closest companion and chief strategist, al-Bashir, took upon himself the role of political commissar, enforcing doctrinal discipline among the Masmuda tribesmen, often with a heavy head. This culminated in an infamous purge conducted by al-Bashir in the winter of 1129–30, with mass executions of disloyal partisans. What has been characterized as a brief reign of terror. Battle of al-Buhairi. In early 1130, the Almohads finally descended from the mountains for the first sizable attack on the Almoravids in the lowlands. It was a disaster. Al-Bashir led the Almohad armies first against Ahmed. They quickly defeated the Almoravid force that came out to meet them, and then chased the fleeing remnant back to Marrakesh. The Almohad set up a siege camp before Marrakesh, the first recorded siege of the Almoravid capital, whose walls had only recently been erected. The Almoravid emir Ali ibn Yusuf immediately called upon reinforcements from other parts of Morocco. After 40 days of siege in Med, heartened by news of the approach of a relief column from Sijil Massa, the Almoravids sallied from Marrakesh in force and crushed the Almohads in the bloody Battle of al-Buhairi. The Almohads were routed, suffering huge human losses. 12,000 men from the Haga alone. Al-Bashir and several other leading figures were killed in action, if not for a sudden torrential rain that broke up the fighting and allowed the remnant to escape back to the mountains. The Almohads might have been finished off then and there. Almohads after Ibn Tumart. Ibn Tumart died in August 1130, only a few months after the disastrous defeat at al-Buhairi. That the Almohad movement did not immediately collapse by the combined blows of the crushing defeat and large losses at the walls of Marrakesh, and the deaths of not only the spiritual leader, but also their chief military commanders, is testament to the careful organization that Ibn Tumart had built up at Tinmol. Ibn Tumart had set up the Almohad commune as a minutely detailed pyramidal hierarchy with 14 grades. At the top was the Ahl-Adar, supplemented by a privy council known as the Council of Ten, which included the Ifriqiyan migrants who had first joined Ibn Tumart in Malala. There was also a wider consultative council of 50, composed of the sheikhs of the major Masmuda Berber tribes, the Haga, the Ganfisa, the Gadmilwa, the Hintata, the Haskara and the Hazraya. The Almohad military had been organized as arranged units, named by tribe, with subunits and internal hierarchies carefully and exactly spelled out. There were also organized groups of Talba and Hufaz, the preachers that had been the original missionaries and spreaders of Ibn Tumart's message. The Council of Ten. Ibn Tumart organized the Inner Council of Ten, composed of the 10 who had first borne witness to Ibn Tumart as Mahdi. Several of them were drawn from the corps of followers that Ibn Tumart had picked up in Ifriqiya. Others were local leaders drawn from the local Masmuda Berbers who had proven early adherents. Although the list has some variations and there is some dispute in names, the Council of Ten is frequently identified as follows. Of the Council of Ten, 5 were killed at al-Buhairi in 1130, 2 died in subsequent years, and only 3 survived well into the height of the Almohad Empire: Abd al-Mumin, Omar Hintata and Ismail al-Hazraji. Succession. The Almohad hagiographer al-Baydak claims that Ibn Tumart had already designated Abd al-Mumin as his successor back in Bajar, but it seems more probable that there was an intense power struggle for succession in the aftermath of Ibn Tumart's death. With half the Council of Ten killed at al-Buhairi, Abd al-Mumin laid claim as the successor of the Ibn Tumart. Abd al-Mumin's claim was challenged by Ibn Malwiyah as well as by the Ahl al-Dar. Exactly how Abd al-Mumin imposed himself is uncertain. As a Zenata Berber, Abd al-Mumin was an alien among the Masmuda, but that foreignness itself might have recommended him as a neutral choice to the Masmuda sheikhs, as it would avoid the appearance of favoritism towards any particular tribe. Nonetheless, it is reported that the more easterly Masmuda tribes, the Haskara and the Hazahar, rejected Abd al-Mumin's leadership and broke away from the Almohad coalition. At this stage, Abd al-Mumin would have to force them back to the fold. That Abd al-Mumin managed to conceal the death of Ibn Tumart for nearly 2 years, in order to gather allies and marry the daughter of Omar Hintati, who would become his principal ally. His principal rival Ibn Malwiyah was captured, condemned and executed by 1132, and Ibn Tumart's own family soon disappears from significance. The roles eclipsed by Abd al-Mumin's own family, the future dynasty of Almohad caliphs. Whatever doubts lingered about Abd al-Mumin's leadership certainly dissipated a decade later, when Abd al-Mumin led the renewed Almohads down from the mountains on a 7-year campaign of conquest of Morocco, culminating in the fall of Marrakesh in 1147. Bibliography written by Ibn Tumart. Le Livre de Mohammed-Ibn Tumart, Mahdi des Almohads, 1903 edition. Ignac Goldziher, editor, Algiers. P. Fontana. Full text online. Introduction. And Amp. Avaristel Acute Vi Provençal, editor. Documents inédits d'Histoire Almohad. Fragments manuscrits du Legajo, 1919 du Fonds Arabe de l'Escurial, Paris, Gouthna. Written about Ibn Tumart. Bourweber, Rashid. A propos de la date de naissance d'Ibn Tumart. Revue d'Histoire et de Civilisation du Maghreb, January, pp. 19-25. Cornell, Vincent J. Understanding is the mother of ability, responsibility and action in the doctrine of Ibn Tumart. Studia Islamica, No. 66, pp. 71-103. JSDOR. Fletcher, Madeleine. The Almohad Tawhid, Theology which Relies on Logic. Newman, Volume 38, No. 1, 1991, pp. 110-127. From Ets. Alan J. The Almohad Mecca, Locating Igli and the Cave of Ibn Tumart. Alcantara, ISSN 0211-3589, Volume 26, No. 1, pp. 175-190. Garcia, Senan A. The Masmuda Berbers and Ibn Tumart, an ethnographic interpretation of the rise of the Almohad movement in Ufahamu, ISSN 0041-5715, Volume 18, Number 1, p. 3-24, Huichi, Miranda A. Colección de Crónicas Árabes de la Reconquista, 3 vols, Tetuan. Editora Marroquí, Huichi, Miranda A. Historia Política del Imperio Almohad, 2 vols. Tetuan. Editora Marroquí. Ibn Khaldun, Biographical Dictionary, 1843 M. Deslain Trans. Paris. Volume 3, p. 205. Julien Charles André, Histoire de l'Afrique du Nord, des Origines A. 1830-1961 ed. Paris. A.O. Kennedy, Hugh Muslim Spain and Portugal, A Political History of Al-Andalus, London. Addison Wesley Longman, Laoist H. Un fatwa d'Ibn Taymiyyah sur Ibn Tumart, in Bulletin de l'Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale, Lix p. 158-184. Messier R. A. Almoravids and the Meanings of Jihad, Santa Barbara, Caliph, Praga. Millet, René Les Almohads. Histoire d'une dynastie Berberi, Paris. Soc d'éditions géographiques. Wasserstein, D.J. A Joan of Theme in the Biography of Ibn Tumart, in F. Naftry and J. W. Murray. Editors, Culture and Memory in Medieval Islam. Essays in Honor of Wilfred Madelung. New York. I.B. Taurus. p. 232-49.